Hello everyone. In this video, we will learn how to create dynamic routes using React Router DOM version 6. This is the finished project we will be building. So inside the resources tab, we have created some cards, and if I click any of this card, you can see that our route is resources/1, and we can see the profile for our first resource. If I click on card 2, then our route becomes resources/2, and we can see the profile of the second resource. And we're actually getting this from a single component. So let's see how we can do this. So let's go to the resources tab. And currently, as you can see, there is nothing in the resources tab except for the resources text. So we're making a HRMS project, and the resources are actually the employees in a company. So I want some resources or some employee profiles in the resources tab. I haven't set up any backend for this project, so we will be using a fake data API from the internet. The most popular one is JSONPlaceholder. So let's go to the website. And in JSONPlaceholder, as you can see that if I visit this /users endpoint, you can see that we have some fake data here. So I will be using the users endpoint for the resources of our project. So let's head back to our project's code. And inside of the resources route, so inside of routes, resources.jsx, I will make a get request, and I will get all of this resources or users, whatever you want to call it. So we need this endpoint, and let's get back to the code. Now, to make a API call, we can use the default fetch API that JavaScript provides. But I want to use a package called Axios because it provides a lot of flexibility and it's really simple to use. So let's install Axios in our project. And this will take some time. So it's completed. We have to make the API call inside of a use effect hook. So let's import it. And then we have to create a async function. I will call this function fetch resources. And inside we will get a response. And we have to await this because it will return us a promise. Of course, we have to import Axios, so don't forget that. And then we have to execute this function. Now, we need to get this response out of this fetch resources function. So for this, I will create a state. And its initial value will be an empty array. And I will set the set resources, and I will set the resources as the response dot data, and let's console log the resources. Right. So if I inspect now, okay, so we still got an infinite loop. That is because we did not give it a dependency array. I mean, if we wanted to call on only the first time this component renders, we have to provide it an empty array. So if I provide this empty array and refresh, you can see that that infinite loop problem is gone. And inside we have all the users or the resources. Now let's map all of these resources and create some card with them. So back in the code, inside of this div, I will create a material UI grid. So I just imported it. And the first one, the parent one, has to be a container. It has to have a container prop. And it doesn't require any value or anything. And we have to give it a spacing as well. So let's give it a spacing of 3. And inside of this grid, I will map the resources. And we'll get a single resource inside of this. And inside of this map, we have to create another grid. And this one will be item. It requires an item prop. And we also need to specify the column size. So on smaller devices or greater, it should have a column size of 4. And inside of this grid, I will create a card. So I have to import it again. And inside of this card, we need a card content. We need to import that as well. And now I will give it a typography. Inside of this typography, the component needs to be, say, H3 or H4, but the variant will be H6. And inside of this, resource dot, say, name. I think we do have name somewhere. And the reason that it is red, that is because we did not provide the key. So we have to provide a key, and that will be resource.id. So we do have ID and name, as you can see. And if I close this inspect, you can see that we have all of those resources. Now, whenever I click any of this card, I want to see the individual profile. So I have to make these cards link. So let's do that. So inside of the grid, I will import the material UI link. And I will also import the link from React Router DOM. But since we already have a link, we cannot have two link. So I will call the link from React Router DOM router link. So let's wrap this card with the link. And this is actually the link from Material UI, and it takes a component prop, and the component will be router link. And now it can take a to prop, and the to prop will be /resources/ I will give it the ID. It has to be resource.id. We can also disable this underline if we want to. So inside of the link component, we can just say underline equals to none. But you can keep the underline if you want to. I just don't like it. So if I click any of this card now, as you can see, we get an error, we get a 404 error, but our route has changed. As you can see, it's resources/1. For the second card, it's resources/2. For the third, you can see that it's resources/3, and so on. You get the idea. Now we get the error because we have not yet created the route for this. And as you can see, this route isn't like the others that we have created so far. The last part of this route, it changes. So we have to make a dynamic route. So let's create a dynamic route. So back in the code, let's head over to the router.jsx. First, I will remove this unnecessary import. We will not be using browser router in our project. And let's create the route. So we want our new route to have this sidebar and this top bar. So the new route will also be a children of the root route. So inside the children of the root route, let's create a new route. So ID of this will be 6 and the path will be, I don't know why I put this trailing slashes. They're not really necessary. Maybe I mistyped. Okay. So the path of this new route will be resources slash then colon resource ID. So whatever we put after resources and then slash, whatever we put after the resources slash will become the resource ID. So this is the dynamic part. I will show you what I'm talking about in a few moments, but let's just create a component that will render when we visit this route. So it's not going to be settings. On the routes, I will create a new component called single resource.jsx. Let's Pascal case this. So single resources. And inside of this, I'll just write hello from single resources. And I will render this component whenever I visit this dynamic route. So single resources instead of the settings. And the name, it's actually optional. I think we don't need the name. So I'll just close this. We needed the name for the sidebar, but we don't need the name anymore. And if I go to the browser now, we have a problem. We're actually showing the new route on the sidebar. So let's handle that inside of the root.jsx. Let's filter this. I think it's this one. Yeah. So routes, actually routes dot filter, and inside of the route.jsx, we don't really need the icon for this new route. So let's remove that, and we will filter based on it. So only for the routes that have this icon property, we will filter it and we'll show it in the sidebar. So again, I'll just do route because this will be block scope, so no problem. We can use route twice. And only when we have route, only when we have the icon. So let's remove the routes and let's map this filtered array. So you know that filter returns an array and the same routes array, but only the routes that has the icon property. And then we're mapping it. Actually, there is a problem, I think. So what is this? Okay, so it's working now. The reason that we got that error was because we're actually finding our route by matching the route.path with location.pathname, which will not match our latest dynamic route because this part is dynamic and it will not, I mean, colon resource ID will not match any actual location.pathname. So for now, I'll just ignore this and I will just optional chain it. All right. Just optional chain it and it will work. So if I go to the browser now and if I visit resources and then if I click any of these cards, you will see that we have hello from single resources. So we have just created a dynamic route. So if I go back and if I click this, as you can see for the ID too, we also get the single resources. For ID, say 4 or 5, we also get the same component. Now we will talk about this resource ID. So let's go back to the SingleResource.jsx, and this ID part, this dynamic part, is called the URL parameter. Okay, this is called the URL parameter, and we can get this from React Router DOM. So we have a hook called useParams, and it will return a params object. And if I console log this params, and let's visit the browser. So if I inspect on the console and then hit refresh, you can see that we have our params. So inside of the params object, just ignore the last two. It's for the Firebase user. I'm just going to go to the root and disable this console log so you can understand better. All right, so let's refresh again. You can see that we have resource ID equals to 5. If I go to the first one, you'll see that we have resource ID 1. So whatever we put after this, if I put a random number, you can see that we have that as the resource ID. So like I said, whatever we put after the resources slash, it will become the resource ID. So this part after the colon. Now it can be number, it can be text, or it can be anything else. So if I put text instead of number, it will also work. So our resource ID is now this meaningless text. Okay, so let's go back to the SingleResource.jsx, and what I want to do is inside this component, I will show some users, single users info. So when I visit this, let's close the console. So when I click this resource, inside of this, I want to show the resources profile. So we have many things like inside of the resources. If I go inside of the array, as you can see that we have number, we have username, we have email, we have address, object, etc. So inside of this each resources, I want to show the user's information. So how can we do that? So let's get back to the JSON placeholder, and it provides us another API, and we can get the single user with that API. So if I put just after the users, if I put a slash, and if I match any of this ID, say 1, 2, 3, it gives us 10 users. So anything between 1 to 10. If I put the number here, let's say 1, I will get the single user or the resource in our case. So let's do it. And you can see that we have got the single resource. So see that the name is Leanne Graham. It's the same as this one. So we can use this endpoint to fetch a single user. So let's get back to our single resources, and we will make another API call here. So I will now destructure this params. We can just do resource ID. So destructured, and we no longer have params. So let's just delete that console log. And since we're making another get request, I will use the use effect hook. And inside of this use effect hook, it takes a function and it takes a dependency array. And inside of this use effect, of course, we need to import Axios. So axios.get, and let's just put the URL. Whoops. So copy it again and paste. And we have to create a async function. So const, let's call it fetch single resource, and it should be an async function. Inside of this async function, I will call this API and I will call it response. And then I need to execute this async function. So just below, let's execute this function. And we need this response outside of this use effect block. So I need to create a state. So I'll call this state resource without the S, set resource. I will initiate it with a empty object. Let's set the resource to response.data. Now, if I console log the resource, let's see what we get. And it wants, okay, so I think we made a mistake in the, not resource, it's resource. So resource, and it requires the resource as the dependency. Well, we can just do it outside the use effect, so it will no longer require that resource. All right. So if I go back to the code, I mean browser, and let's just hit refresh and see the console. We have an empty object. Okay, so it doesn't look that good. Now, why is that? That is because we did not await this, I think. So let's try again. Yeah. So if I await that, yeah, that was the problem. Because this is a async function, and this get request returns a promise, we actually needed to await it. So we got a single object, and we can actually render it inside the component now. Now, there is a simple problem because this is the first resource. If I go to the second resource, you will see that we get the same object. Now, this is not really expected because we want this to be dynamic and we want a different object on different resource. So how do we do that? We can do it by using string interpolation. So let's create it with backticks. And after this users, I will just put the resource ID. So if it can be 1, 2, 3, and anything. If it's 1, then we'll get the first object. If it's 2, then we'll get the second object. So let's check this in the browser. So as you can see, I'll just refresh now. So you can see that we get the first object or the first resource. If I go to the second resource and refresh, you can see that we get the second resource. So this is actually working. And let's render this in the UI. We need a dependency array inside, so the dependency is resource ID. Inside of this div now, I will render some of the value of the resource object, and it's going to be very simple. It's going to be very basic. I will just render some typography component, and inside of them, I will just render those value of the resource object. So I have a snippet copied and I will paste it inside of this div. So as you can see that we have to import the typography, the box, and that's it. So first we have the resource ID, then we have the resource name and the username inside of a box. I also gave the username a color that's using the purple.main color, and then I have the email, and then I have the company name. So I did not render all of those values, just some of those values of the resource object. So if I go back to the browser now, you can see that we have a error because we cannot read the properties of undefined and reading name. The reason is that When we first refresh this page, or say we come to this page or component, it's still making the API call. And when this component is first rendered, this resource actually is an empty object, and resource.name, resource.username, these values are undefined. They don't exist. So we have to do optional chaining. So once they're available, it will be shown in the user interface. So put it here as well. It's unnecessary here. I just need to do it in here. So we have optional chain. Okay, the ID is remaining. Now if I go back, okay, and still something is missing, I guess. Right. Maybe this one. Okay, so as you can see that it's now working. So for the first one, we get the first object or the first resource. For the second one, we get the second resource. And for the third one, we get the third resource. So you get the idea. Now we have one more problem that's remaining. If I go to the resources tab again, you can see that we have only 10 resources. So if I put 10, then we get some value. If I put 1, then we get some value. That means that if I put 1 to 10, we get a users or resources profile. But let's say if I provide 100, then in that case, there will be nothing to show. So this doesn't really make any sense. We need to show the user, we can show the user a meaningful message that no data is available. So what we can do is we can make an early return, and we can check if the resources object is empty or not. Because if nothing is found, that means currently 100 doesn't exist, and the resources object will be empty in this case. So we have to check if the resources object is empty or not. So let's make an early return and check if the resources object is empty or not. So to do that, we have object.keys, and we have to pass the object that we want the keys. So it will be resource. And what this code will do is it will make an array with the keys of an object. So we can map this array, or we can find the length of this array. We can do anything we want. So I will find the length of this array, and I want to check if the length of this array is 0 or not. So if the length is 0, then it's an empty object. And I will return no data available. So if I go, as you can see, for 100, we get no data available. If I go and visit 1, we get data. But if I go, say, 50, all right, so we get no data available. All right, so we have created dynamic routes. In the next video, I will show you how to add spinner while the API is fetching data. So stay tuned. If you're enjoying these videos, then please like and subscribe to our channel. If you face any kind of problem, then please let us know in the comment section. Also, if you are looking for the starter code, you will find it in the latenightcoder.com. I will put the link in the description below. Stay with us. That's it for this video. I will see you in the next one.